A very good day to all of you guys. Hope you guys are doing well. Welcome to our third combined class series session where we are focusing on Unit 9 of your syllabus. As all of you guys know, Unit 9 is basically international trade and finance. Okay, so international trade. Unit 10 is actually international finance. So, in terms of your exam, you guys are also familiar that Unit 9 and 10 are tested together. In the previous syllabus, Unit 9 and 10 was actually one unit. In the new syllabus or in the syllabus that you guys are learning, we have broken it down to two units. Unit 9, international trade and related concepts. Then Unit 10, international finance and foreign exchange rates. Okay, right. So in terms of Unit 9, today's session or this session will focus on identifying the international trade trends of Sri Lanka. Especially, we are going to focus on the export structure of Sri Lanka, import structure of Sri Lanka, and we will also talk a bit about, right? We'll also talk a bit about how Sri Lanka is, what are the challenges we face and what kind of strategies can we use to convert our economy into a more export-oriented economy. Convert our economy into a more export-oriented economy or export-driven economy, which is a big part of the economic revival, economic transformation policies we are trying to follow. Okay, export-driven economy. Apanayana abhimukha or apanayana arthikya, export economy, right? So we will talk about those areas, and then we will finish that part by looking at our export, our international trade directions. So there we will look at our export destinations and our import origins, right? To understand where does Sri Lanka mainly export to, who are our trading partners, and where does Sri Lanka mainly import from, okay? Then we will go into an important series of discussions, starting off with the concept of competitive advantage, and then globalization and international multilateral organizations such as mainly the WTO. We will focus here, World Trade Organization, a basic idea you need to have. And then we will go into an area known as economic integration. Economic integration. So that's basically the coverage for the day or this session. So yeah, let's have a productive virtual learning session and get the job done. Okay. With that, let me go to the study material first, then I'll come to the slides as well. Right. So by now on the screen, you guys should be able to see the study material that you have, the hard copy of for Unit 9. I'll just scroll into the area where we need to focus on. Right. So basically, essentials 4. The question is outline the export composition and performance of Sri Lanka in recent years. So it says, based on the Central Bank of Sri Lanka annual report, the export composition will only include goods. Now that's an important thing. We are only talking about goods exports. Here, as you guys know, we can engage in international trade not only based on tangible or visible goods. We can also engage in international trade based on services. But the export structure of the country, when we talk about the export structure or the composition, our focus is on goods exports. Okay. The central bank export composition of Sri Lanka comprises of 4 main sectors or categories. Mainly we focus on the agricultural exports, industrial exports, mineral exports, 3 main areas. Then unclassified exports, where these are exports that do not require us to go for a separate category. So we commonly group them into one area that is unclassified. We haven't classified them. They are small, insignificant values. Right. So if you look at the export structure of Sri Lanka, you can see under each main sector, there is a sub-item that is dominating that sector. Those kinds of trends you guys have to see, right? I've given you the picture of the recent period of time. Then a very common question that is asked, and I will answer that in the very beginning, is, so do we need to memorize all these numbers? Not exactly. I have given the 2019, 20, 21 values to see a trend. So you guys always should try to see a trend, whether it's increasing, decreasing, on average, what is the value? So you can get an idea of those things by looking at the numbers from 2019 up to 2022. Then for the main sector and the main sub-item, I'll repeat, for the main sector and the main sub-item or items, okay, you need to know the values, have an idea of the values for 2022, right? You can see our agricultural exports shows in 2019 it was 20.6, but then 2020 20.3, 21.8, then 19.6. So at least if you look at the last 3 years, there is a decreasing trend in the contribution of the agricultural exports. Sorry, I said sector earlier. Agricultural exports to the total exports of the country. So 19.6 is the value for 2022. Within that 19.6, you can see the main contributor is tea. The main contributor is tea exports. And the contribution of the tea exports also seems to, again, showing a declining trend from 2020, if you take, from 12.4 to 9.6. Got it? Right. Then, if you take yes, Ajay, your understanding is correct. And they are not significant enough for us to have a separate classification or a category. Okay? Right. Then industrial exports is the biggest sector, and there is a increase in the contribution of industrial sector, especially from 2020 up to 22. Okay. So definitely remember the value 79.8. Know that for 2022. And average just it's around the 75 plus range, no, or close to 80. So that you have to remember with them, right? Industrial agriculture in the 20 lower 20 mid or lower 20 range. You have to remember that, or around 20%. You have to remember that. Okay. Then what are the main contributors under the industrial export sector? The single biggest item is textiles and garments. So that is absolutely something you have to know, textiles and garments, where the contribution has also steadily increased, as you can see, from 2020 to 22. Then another main contributing item is rubber exports. So here we will try to remember 2 because that is the main sector. Then mineral exports contribution is less than 1% or less than half a percent, 0.4. So that is something you can just keep in mind. So this is a basic analysis you have to do on the export composition of Sri Lanka. So we will analyze this a bit more, but the basic idea you guys are clear. Then if I go to the slides, I can finish a certain part here, and I'll come back to that. Okay. If you look at a small trend now, ignore the values for 18, 19, 20, those we have discussed now. I wanted to focus on 1977 when Sri Lanka more or less adopted this open economic policy, right? In 1977, look at the contributions. If you guys, since you guys have the tute, can you make a note of this, right? Somewhere on the left-hand side of the table that you have in page number 28, right? You can write these values just to get an idea, whatever the values you can write. In 1977, agricultural exports was 80%. 80% of our exports came from agriculture. Then out of that, the single biggest contribution came from tea in 1977. 45 years ago, more or less, right? 4.5 decades ago. Then industrial only contributed 14%, textile garment only 2%, mineral had a contribution of around 5%. Mineral had a contribution of about 5%. What are you guys doing? You're making a quick note in page 28, either on the left or right hand side of the table, about these numbers that I have highlighted in front of the relevant heading or the item. Done? Right. So what has happened is, over the last 4.5 decades, Sri Lanka has transformed its export structure, export composition, from that of a agriculture dominant export composition or structure, export structure, to that of an industry dominant export structure, where the single biggest contributing item has gone from tea around 53% in 77 to textiles and garments, which was only 14% in 1977. This transformation you guys need to see from 1977, where we officially became a fully fledged open economy, up to now. The transformation is clear. Okay? Right. So with that, I will come back to the study material. It says, after more than 45 years of open economic policy, the export structure of Sri Lanka has transformed from one that is agri-export dominant to that of industrial dominant export structure. Then it says, during this period, spanning more than 4 decades, 1.5 decades, in terms of the largest net export income generating item, textiles and garments. What is our largest net export income? Net meaning, if we import anything to produce that good, you minus that. Net export income generating item is textiles and garments, has dominated over tea. So textiles and garments have dominated over tea. Get it? Over tea. It used to be tea, no? Right. Then the main export destination of Sri Lanka, we'll look at this separately also, but it's good to know this, right? Sri Lanka mainly exports our textiles and garments to USA and Western or European countries, especially for textiles and garments. Then tea we export to a few Mediterranean countries, Middle Eastern countries, and Russia and these kinds of countries. Okay, right. Problems faced in export trade are as follows. Now, I'm focusing specially due to the impact of the health, economic and social crisis created by the COVID-19 pandemic and the Forex crisis. So Forex crisis is mainly connected to the pandemic. Also the economic, some people call this the debt or the inflation. Okay, inflation crisis, economic crisis, debt crisis, or inflation crisis. That is mainly the 2022 period. Okay, so I've summarized it to a few points. We can talk a bit more also. Price fluctuations in export crops and commodities, right? Especially the demand from America and other countries that we mainly export to, because America, for our bad luck, right now, when America was the country, the more developed country, advanced economy that had the highest loss of lives or casualties and the economic impact from the pandemic, when European countries really suffered from the pandemic, someone in Sri Lanka could look at those countries and have this very unethical, happy thoughts that look at them, they are suffering, we are okay because we were relatively okay with the pandemic. No, we managed it well, to be honest, and we also cooperated with the government to health authorities to get it under control most of the time. But while we can have that happiness that they are doing bad, we are doing good, the end of the day, what we have to understand is when America and most European countries do bad, right? Western European countries do bad, that leads to a major impact on us because they are our main export buyers. When their economies collapse or go into recession, they have less consumer expenditure. When they have less consumer expenditure, they have less demand for our exports. That leads to major price falls, price shocks in our exports. Okay? Right. Decrease in export volume. Overall, what we exported decreased due to, again, demand side reasons and supply side reasons, especially the difficulty of supply chain blockages, problems, and the difficulty of finding raw materials that we needed. High dependence of import intermediate. So that's the next point actually in more detail. Intermediate inputs used by Sri Lankan export-oriented sector. Our manufacturing sector, our textiles garment sector came to a standstill because we couldn't bring down the fabrics and the other materials we needed, the machines we needed to replace the ones that are depreciated, right? So, and then high instabilities in the world market and global economic. World market fluctuations are very high in prices, right? And also global economic recession. This is caused by the pandemic. We call this the pandemic recession or the pandemic induced recession. When the global economy goes into a recession, when the global demand and the global activity levels, economic activity levels reduce, that affects all the countries. Okay? Unless you're North Korea. Right. Perfectly closed economy. Then slow growth of main export markets. We talked about this, especially US and European region. So these were the major challenges we had to face. And then with the debt or the inflation crisis, these difficulties, these challenges we were facing already in the export sector after the pandemic intensified, increased, and almost our export sector came into, especially the manufacturing export sector, industrial export sector came into a major point of collapse. It didn't collapse, or many small, medium scale export oriented factories and manufacturers and producers actually went bankrupt and they closed down their activities. Right. Then now, yes, we clearly have a problem in our export sector. And as I said earlier, Sri Lanka wants to become an export-driven economy, export-oriented economy, or export economy simply. So what are the strategies we can follow? I've outlined 13 strategies that we can follow based on what your professors have said, based on the general understanding we have on how other countries have have developed their export sector into very stable, strong sectors, right? So you don't need to remember all 13 strategies, but you need to pick the most relevant strategies and about 6 or 7 strategies. If you can remember, that will be good for you. Okay? In answering a question connected to this area. We'll quickly go through them, right? Pay attention to improve the relationship between Sri Lanka and the global economy. That is one of the first things we have to do, because our policies are so inconsistent and keep on changing. We have crossed, or we have made, we have disappointed many countries who do a lot of bilateral trade with us. Okay, so we need to really work on improving our international trade relationship with rest of the world. Okay, and we need to have solid, consistent policies on this. Right? When one president comes and encourages countries like Japan and China and India and all the other countries to give us bilateral assistance, and we go and sign trade agreements with them and all that we do. When another president comes, all of a sudden, unannounced, at once, we scrap those agreements or we pull out of them and we say, no, we don't want this anymore. And, those kinds of things really make international economic relations difficult. Then reduce the dependence on imported intermediate goods. That lesson, I wouldn't say we 100% learn still, right? We take time to learn lessons. But during the pandemic, there was a considerable lesson we learned, that our heavy dependency on imported intermediate inputs, raw materials and other inputs, especially things like energy products, petrol, diesel. Now in 2022, one of the biggest problems we had was energy shortages. That is because we depend on fossil fuels so much. We haven't really gone into, in a big way, in a sustainable way, on renewable energy sources. So as a result, when we don't have dollars to import petrol, diesel and kerosene and whatever not, we go into a major economic shock. Okay. Then increase in economic promotion and marketing programs in foreign countries. This is to expand our markets, right? We do have a few good areas, markets, countries we focus on, but we need a major market diversification. Market diversification. So here I've talked about export diversification and then, yes, market diversification. So, right. Strengthening trade agreements productively. Productively meaning where it should bring benefits to both countries, or the countries engaged in the trade agreement or entering the trade agreement. And more than productively, the word I wanted to use here is proactively. Can we change that? I think that is a typo there. Proactively. We can't wait for these other countries to come and say, Anya, Sri Lanka, shall we? We can't wait for other countries to come and call us to play the international trade game. We have to convince them to come and deal with us, come and engage in international trade economic activities with us. It will be proactive, not reactive, right? We do have several trade agreements. We'll talk about them today, but we need to strengthen them and again make them more active. Then export diversification is a big thing, right? Export diversification, especially in terms of, right, protecting export markets, but also we need to expand the markets as well, go into new markets. Export diversification is where Sri Lanka, we used to be the tea people, tea, rubber, coconut people, then now we are the garments people. But we need much more diversification in our export structure. Last week also we talked about this. We need to put more eggs in more baskets rather than putting all our eggs in one or two baskets, which is a risk. And that risk we saw in the 2019 pandemic related recession, and we saw that in the 2022 economic debt or inflation crisis situation also. The risk of lack of diversification. Then establishing institutions to promote industrial activities which focus on exports. So make our industries more export oriented, export focused. Establishing of a council for export development. Now we have the EDB, Export Development Board, which the president, the finance minister himself says doesn't do its job, doesn't serve the purpose. So if the government itself is saying one of its boards or authorities is not doing its job, then we need a institutional reform. We need a better institution for this. Okay. Then we go into further strategies. Strong approach towards foreign markets by establishing trade agreements. So these are in some way touched on the first 7, but more specifically I'm explaining. Strategic promotion of trade. Again, we talked about that. Promote industrial activities, promote our trade more, brand it better, give more value to this thing called Made in Sri Lanka. Right. Then further rationalization of tariff policies. Now that's an important point. Yes, our international trade related uh, tax structure, tariff policies are not very rational. They are very ad hoc. You know, at that moment to solve a problem, we will go and charge a tax. We don't think long term. Then privatization of export promotion. So again the issue with EDB, Export Development Board. You know, their inability to properly do the export promotions, that brand made in Sri Lanka, Ceylon tea, you know, garments without guilt, that tech apparel brands, how we really put our name, put our brand name in the world market. The EDB doesn't seem to have the expertise to do that. Maybe we should hand it over to the private sector. Right? Then entering into bilateral agreements which help export promotion, bilateral meaning between two countries, right? At the moment, what Sri Lanka has more or less is, we have the Indo-Lanka Free Trade Agreement, India-Sri Lanka, Pakistan-Sri Lanka Free Trade Agreement. We have the Singapore-Sri Lanka Free Trade Agreement, which is not still fully active. We have some negotiations with China, so that's about it, right? While there are more than 200 countries and territories in the world that we can deal with. Number 13, continuous participation for multilateral approach, right? So multilateral, deal with many countries. Your international trade also diversify, you know, balance everything. We saw with that Iranian president coming in to open the Umayyad project, to commission open the Umayyad project, to, you know, how America reacted, how Israel reacted, you know, that's that geopolitical game, and we have to balance it well and deal with more countries, so that again we have we are reducing the risk of you know, some countries having problems with us politically, strategically, economic issues, and where our entire economy doesn't get affected by that. Right. Any questions, please? If you guys have anything to clarify, please do ask. Okay. If you feel like you forget these points that I explained, a good resource you have is a video resource you have is the recorded session. Once it is made available eventually within a few days, you can watch. And please remember those recordings for Unit 9, right? Because I do a live class. The first thing is try to make it for the live class. If not, you can watch the recording. But remember, these recordings also will not be available indefinitely. Okay, there's a certain period that it will be available. After that, it will have to be available. It will be available, but there might be a bit of an investment to do. So my strong recommendation is, much as possible, as soon as the recording is available, try to make sure you watch it a few times if necessary. If it's a 3-hour recording, Puta, you don't have to sit in one place and watch the entire thing for 3 hours. You know how to plan that. You can watch half an hour, 20 minutes, you know, bring back your concentration, take a break, come back, likewise. Okay? It's at your discretion, you can watch. Got it? So please make use of that. But when it is available, it's not going to be available on a continuous basis. Now, don't get excited with that part and come and, you know, ask, talk to me during the classes and all that, and don't fuss about that. Don't worry about that. For a reasonable time, it will be available, but why I am doing that is purposefully to get you guys to watch them. Otherwise, you will keep procrastinating and delaying it. And after some time, you will realize I have about 4, 5, 6 videos to watch, each 3, 4 hours, and you will never come around to doing it. So deadline sometimes helps us to actually commit to something and get it done. Is that clear? Right. Why should you use the video resource or the recorded version? For two purposes. One, if you miss the class, for catch up. Number two, to recap. If you were in the live class, but something that I explained you can't remember, you go back and watch. I hope I was very clear. There's a question asked by one of your classmates. What are bilateral agreements? As I explained earlier, Buddha, that's where I mentioned, if you remember, Sri Lanka has agreements with India, Pakistan, Singapore, not very fully active still. We're in negotiation with China, right? We are in negotiation with Indonesia and countries like Thailand, but nothing is being signed. Bilateral meaning between two countries, free trade agreements. We'll talk about that separately in the near future today, right? Import structure. So the main classification, again, imports also the catch is the same or the basis is the same. We look at goods, okay? Consumer goods, intermediate goods, investment goods, not to get confused. Consumer, intermediate, investment, okay? Then unclassified is there. Again, you know what to do with this now. The trends to be identified, 2022 values, main item, main sector and the sub-item to be remembered. Consumer goods, over the years, you can see, especially from 2020 again, that's the base, because 19 is a Sunday, that whole process, because of that devastation, 19 is, there's a bit of an abnormality. Then someone could ask, sir, what about the pandemic and all? Yes, all that has an impact. So my on 2020, 21, 22 also, but if you want to see a trend, I think you need to at least look at 3 years. So I'm looking at the most recent 3 years to get the trend. 21, 18, 15. So there's a clear reduction. And 2022, right? So there's a clear reduction in the contribution. 2022, 15.4%. The main item is food and beverages. Sri Lanka imports under consumer goods, food and beverages mainly. So that is clear, and that also seems to have up and down. That is increase, decrease, mixed trend is there. No, that is affected by it. So 21, 22 mainly there is this import restrictions we had on many non-essential food items and beverages and things like that. Okay. Then the non-food group, yes, non-food imports, but consumer goods. The biggest item here used to be vehicles. Biggest item here used to be, right? I know, looks ugly, right? The biggest item here used to be vehicles, right? But since 2020, for almost now 4 years, we have stopped the import of vehicles. Because we have stopped the import of vehicles, the non-food sector is lesser than the food and related products. Okay? Any questions you can ask? Then medicine and pharmaceuticals we have taken separately. So that also actually comes under non-food sector, right? This is part of this. And as you can see, personal vehicles also there because we have imported less. Can you see in 2019, without personal vehicles, it's 2.8. If you consider personal vehicles alone is 4.1. Get it? Then, but 2021, 22, we don't have personal vehicles. We have stopped the imports completely. Intermediate goods. The biggest item in imports is intermediate goods. So, right, you can see that here. The trends are basically the increase in the intermediate goods item. Main item, fuel. Okay, petrol, diesel, all that. There's a clear increase as you can see during 2021, even 22. One of the reasons for the percentage increase is the increase, the depreciation of the rupee, right? The LKR depreciation against the US dollar. So per per liter of petrol, diesel, all that, we were paying a big amount because we had to pay more rupees to buy a dollar. Rupee sharply depreciated during that period. Then this is interesting. One of our biggest intermediate goods import items is textiles and textile articles, because this is the raw materials that we use in our industrial sector. We'll keep this to write the 1977 values, right? Mainly the as raw materials, RM, raw materials. So we import textiles and articles, we make the clothes and we export. So still our net amount, that is the export income minus the import expenditure on the raw materials, still the net amount is positive and it's a big contributor to the export structure. Export structure, yes. But we have to keep in mind 16.8% worth of raw materials we import for the what sector? Our biggest export sector. Then investment goods, right? You can clearly see a reduction. This is the impact of the economic crisis, right? I'll answer the question, but give me a moment. This is the impact of the economic crisis because our economic activities, investment activities slowed down. New businesses, new factories, new investment didn't happen. So it went from 21.6 to a major reduction of 16.6% by 2022. And out of that, the main item is what? Machinery and equipments. Machinery and equipments. Yes, what is the question? Let's see. Oops, sorry. What are the textile articles? The different accessories that you need to make garments, right? I'm not going to go into technical detail because I'm not an expert there, but the different items, accessories, I assume things like the threads to the buttons to the zippers to whatever not that you need. Okay, let's identify it that way, but for now. Finished garments, if we import, that doesn't come under this. Finished garments also we import, no? Where we have in our clothing stores, we sell finished garments from China, from India, we import. Thailand, a lot of countries we import finished garments, clothes, right? From European countries also we import. Those don't come under intermediate goods because they are not intermediate, they're consumer goods. They come under non-food consumer goods. Get it? Right. Are we clear? Then the 1977 situation, let's have a look at that. In 1977, our export structure looked this way. Sorry, our import structure looked this way. Right? This was the picture in 1977. Consumer goods was 42%, almost similar to intermediate goods. And fuel was around 24%, right? Non-food was around 3%. Mainly food was the biggest item. Mainly food was the biggest item in 1977. And investment goods was very low at around 12%. Right? Machinery equipment was around 5%. So basically our import structure, the transformation is mostly from more consumer and intermediate good based import structure to a mostly intermediate good based import structure. From a consumer and intermediate good based import structure now to a mostly intermediate good dominant import structure. Is that clear, brother? That is a transformation we can see. Now, what I want you guys to do is, as an exercise, just find out the percentage of, I'll write something here, this is common for both exports and imports. Percentage of exports and imports. Okay? of GDP, as a percentage of GDP, how much is exports, how much is imports? I want to know this value for 2022 period. What is the percentage of GDP represented by exports? Percentage of GDP represented by imports. You guys understand what I'm asking, right? I want you to try and find that figure. It is there in the central bank annual report. It's a matter of looking for it. Give it a bit of an effort and let me know. Okay. So I've given a bit of an idea of what I explained there. Now let's look at the destinations or directions. Now, why you need to do this is because you realize, once you do this, you realize where we have the trade deficit problem, or where we have more than trade deficit. Yeah, exactly. Trade deficit problem, where our income from exporting goods is lesser, considerably lesser than the income from exporting. Our income from exporting goods is considerably lesser than the expenditure on importing goods. Expenditure on importing goods. So we have a trade deficit. We have a deficit. Trade deficit is one of the biggest problems we are having in our economy. Right. Destinations. Where does Sri Lanka mainly export to? Again, look at the trend, and the 22 value is important to know. Mainly our main export destination is USA for textiles and garments mainly. And it's in the range of 25%. Approximate value, 25%. Average value is that. Okay. You can remember it easily. Then what are the other countries we export to? Mostly European countries. UK, Germany. UK is not in the European Union anymore with Brexit and all that. That doesn't mean they are not in the European continent. They are in the European continent, right? They might argue we are a separate island kind of a thing, but end of the day, right? So UK, then Germany, other EU. If you take these as a region, as a country, biggest is USA. As a region, European, we can say EU, European Union or European region, right? European region is the biggest. Okay. Then we do export a bit to India, Middle East, other Asian countries. But mainly this is the trend we see. Okay. Then import origins. The words are a bit important. Import origin. Export. What do we say? Export destination. Export destination, import origin. Get it? So where do we mainly import from? China around, it fluctuates a bit, but I would say around 20%. Right? Then can you see the China and India percentages used to be very close to each other. At times, China percentage is higher than India. You can see that here also. China percentage is higher than India. But what has happened here? There's a change. We are importing 26% from India, 18% from China. How come? But 25% from India, 20% only from China. How come? Average, approximate. Remember the exact value also. How come? Because in 2022, when we had the crisis, we got something called the Indian credit line. We got something called the what line with the Indian credit line. Through that only, we imported medicine. We imported a lot of things from India because we got a credit line, kind of a credit facility from India, when no other country in the world was giving us money as a loan. Get it? That's why the imports from India drastically improved, has increased. Then also other Asia, mainly our our import origins are Asian countries or Asia. Then EU, UAE, Middle Eastern countries, then European countries, it's not that high. Contributions are not that high. Okay. Singapore, Malaysia also around 5%. Now, this might improve if we fully activate the trade agreement with Singapore. Okay. We fully activate the trade agreement with Singapore. Right. Any questions? Now, all this discussion was about, you guys can ask questions, okay? All the discussion was about trading goods, visible, tangible goods. What about trade in services? Trading services is also there. It happens in a big way, especially in for Sri Lanka. That's a very important area, trade in services. But we have to understand trade in services is not straightforward as trade in goods. You know, you can't put things into a container or whatever and just send off or bring down. Trade in services, there are 4 ways in which trade in services happens. We call them the 4 modes, M-O-D-E, M-O-D-E-S, modes of trade in services. So let's focus on them now. Right? First mode is cross-border trade. Services supplied from an institution based in one country to another country. This mode of supplying services is similar to that of supplying goods across borders. So, a company in, right? A company in Sri Lanka, right? A company in Sri Lanka. So this is, we are in Sri Lanka. We offer a service to either companies, right? Or houses or whoever that want our services, right? In another country, rest of the world. And in return, we get a payment. So what we are offering is a service. So really good example of this, right? The many industries are there. Could be something like BPOs, business process outsourcing. Then we have KPOs, knowledge process outsourcing. Then we have software development companies. No? Then other IT related ventures, or we say enterprises. These are examples where the company is Sri Lankan, it's in Sri Lanka, but they offer services to clients in other countries. What is BPO? Can someone unmute the microphone and tell me? In business studies, I'm sure you have learned, but what are BPOs? Business process outsourcing. If your respective business studies teachers, I'm not saying anything wrong about them, but I'm generally talking here. If your respective business studies teachers haven't taken a bit of time to enlighten you on BPOs, KPOs, and the whole, service-driven industries in potential we have, they have done a bit of a disservice to you. Your generation, you guys need to know this big time. Okay? Yes, I've got one answer, but I expected someone to unmute the microphone and give me an answer. What is a BPO? Business process outsourcing. Okay. Do you have any idea of some companies who are into this BPOs, business process outsourcing? Which country is the dominant country in the BPO sector in the world, where there are millions of people working in BPOs? Which country? What is the BPO hub of the world? Singapore does a lot, but they are not the hub. See, in the BPO sector, sometimes because to be successful in the BPO sector, Buddha, you need to have what we call, by the way, this is not people traveling abroad. Is that clear? This is services offered from a Sri Lankan company to clients abroad. People are not traveling anywhere. Right. And as I was saying, to be very, very competitive as a BPO provider or a country, you need to have cheap labor, but educated labor. In a sense, you need to have countries, Ilma, you are correct. You need to have countries that are able to have a reasonably skilled, tech-savvy, English proficiency should be there, but able to engage in deal with other countries. But we should be able to get that labor and take that service at a lower cost. Yeah. So Fatima, you're correct. Sufran, you're correct. So overall, it's India. India is known as the BPO hub of the world. India has put this might be more now. India has more than 25 million people working in the BPO sector. 20 to 25 million people working in BPO companies in India. Our population is 22 million. So Sri Lanka is working in the BPO sector in India. That means that number of people. Is that clear? That big their BPO sector is. Business process outsourcing mostly goes into financial services, back office services, processing activities, things like that. Then compliance related things, all that. Again, this is not my responsibility. Your respective business studies teachers should take a bit of an effort to educate you guys on business studies, on business process outsourcing. Generally, it's a big thing in the world that you guys need to be updated, aware of. I'm sure you have been. I'm just saying. Then KPOs. What are KPOs? I think most of you guys ideally should end up, if you're working for the broader BPO sector, then in a KPO. Knowledge process outsourcing. What is KPOs? Knowledge process outsourcing. These are companies that are mostly into research, financial, business analytics. They work with big data, things like that. They go into even AI ventures and things like that. So they are called KPOs, knowledge process outsourcing. People working in KPO sector have to have certain qualifications, have to have certain analytical skills and certifications to do that. So that's I said, I like to see most of you guys, if you're going into the broader BPO sector, to go into KPOs, knowledge process outsourcing. Again, big business. Now, BPO hub is India because we can't compete with their cost, labor cost and things like that. It's difficult to compete because they have the population strength. But KPOs, India is doing well in KPOs also, but Sri Lanka has a tremendous potential to be a hub for KPOs, knowledge process outsourcing. Just for the purpose of just saying it, no point in talking about our impressive literacy rates in the 95 plus percentile range. Just because we have literacy there doesn't mean if you don't make use of it. So we need to really develop our trading services sector, especially focusing on these kinds of knowledge industries, right? KPOs and things like that. Then even software development companies to IT enterprises, all this comes under this. Okay, right. Any questions you guys can ask? Okay, then Consumers of firms in the home country make use of a service in a foreign country. I'm looking at mode 2, consumption abroad, right? Foreign country, okay? Foreign country by visiting. Now we are actually going to that country by visiting the foreign country. Example, Sri Lankans allow residents to purchase services such as health for different surgical procedures, to take medicine and all that. We go to foreign countries. Now, our esteemed politicians, in Sri Lanka, we don't have public representatives. No, we don't have, what do you call, yeah, we don't have the public representatives. We have, who are they called? I forgot also. We, if possible, IPs. No, this is what we have now. They are very, very important people. I think it's easier to write it this way, right? Because I feel that as time goes on, we keep adding more V's. They become even more V, right? So it's easy to say V IPs maybe, right? So our who are supposed to be public representatives, who are supposed to live within the means we give them, or who are supposed to show us by example that a certain confidence we get in our public services. Now, when our parliamentarians, cabinet ministers, especially want to take some medicine when they are not well or whatever, they don't go to the, as you guys know, right? They don't go to the national hospitals or the Sri Lankan hospitals and take medicine, because the funniest or the saddest part here is sometimes our health minister, who is responsible for our health sector, when our health minister falls sick or has to get a medical procedure or something done, the health minister doesn't trust or doesn't go and show the people, this is where I also take medicine from, doesn't go to the Sri Lankan, doesn't go to the national hospital or the Sri Lankan hospitals, doesn't trust the Sri Lankan healthcare system. The health minister goes to Singapore, Mount Elizabeth or some hospital and gets a treatment. I'm not saying anything about that hospital, but I'm saying, how our public representatives, who have to live within the means we give them, right? So healthcare, education, traveling foreign countries, even for education, mostly their kids, the parents go to Mount Elizabeth in Singapore, kids go to foreign universities because they are into 5 IPs, right? Okay, so education, these are examples of consumption abroad. Then commercial presence. A foreign company setting up commercial enterprise provides service in home country. These are what we call the MNCs, multinational corporations or transnational corporations. Multinational corporations, right? These are multinationals in the service sector, not in the manufacturing sector. So the banks that we have, the foreign banks, the HSBCs, the Standard Chartered, the Citibanks and all that. Then the insurance companies we have in Sri Lanka, foreign insurance companies, all of that comes under MNCs or TNCs, that is commercial presence in Sri Lanka to offer their services. Finally, we have presence of natural persons. You might ask, are there unnatural persons? But basically, the actual person comes to Sri Lanka, kind of an idea, not virtually, physically. Virtual also, I think, can be under this category, but then it goes to the first category, first mode. Individuals traveling from foreign country to supply services in another country. In this mode, foreigners deliver various services. So individuals, they come here. They travel to a foreign country, right, and offer supply services. In this mode, various services received by the residents of the country, residents of Sri Lanka. We have all of these consultants, specialist doctors, that gurus, this gurus, marketing guru, HR guru, TikTok guru, Facebook guru, Instagram guru, whatever not guru, or the experts come in, right? That is what we are talking about. Okay, influencers and all that, right? Any questions on that? No, we are okay. Right. Then we talk about the concept of comparative advantage. Remember, we have learned comparative advantage. We know what is comparative advantage, comparative cost advantage, and we try to compare that with, the words are important. Students get this confused sometimes during the exam also. Competitive. You see the difference? Comparative, competitive. Not the same. Two different concepts. Comparative advantage is about comparative cost. Competitive advantage is actually about absolute cost. So it's more connected with absolute advantage theory. So it's the difference is that. Okay, one of the main differences. So I've explained the whole thing. I'm not going to go word by word with you guys, right? Especially not for comparative advantage, because we have done enough on this. Competitive advantage, right? I've given a good note, Putta. Yes, there's a bit of a thing to explain here. I mean, in the way you explain, right? So these are big mark questions in the paper, right? Big mark questions in the paper. So competitiveness, you have to understand, it's about the ability of a country to produce a international standard or a good quality product at a lower cost. It boils down to that. Competitiveness is about the cost competitiveness. Competitiveness is about the country that can produce at an absolute lower cost. Absolute cost is lowest. Standard product. Okay. So that is the concept I've explained. My source, all of these 3 paragraphs, I'm not over-explaining. I'm not trying to put unnecessary things into your head. Where does it come from? 2020 marking scheme. Read it once, read it twice. The key things will come to your mind. That's for sure. Right? So it's all about better and greater value. Value proposition. Greater value means you get a good product at a lower price. You get a good product at a lower price. Okay? So if you have to have cheap labor. Yes, omnipresent, always available, easy to access natural resources, right? Now, these things, the traditional understanding was only if a country has cheap labor, enough natural resources, they can be competitive. That was the old school thought. But today, we realize it is not about necessarily having cheap labor and resources, natural resources. It's about bringing more technology into this and making sure you are overall more efficient and productive in what you do. So this whole part is a bit important, right? When you read it, give it a bit of importance and read. A nation's competitiveness depends on capacity of the industry innovate and upgrade. So it's now tech driven. What driven? Competition is tech driven. How much we embrace, how much we use technology. Now, when we say technology, we are looking at not the consumption of technology, we are looking at the creation of technology, innovation. So what Sri Lanka does very well is we consume a lot of tech. The digital technology, the content that is there on social platforms, we are very good at consuming that. But and then when we try to create also, we are not that innovative with what we do. We get influenced a lot and we follow something. But countries that are become very competitive, they on the creating side, innovative side, and upgrading and research development and technology side is that they are more on that. We are more on the consumption of the content. High levels of high levels of productivity, effective use of obviously technology, bargaining power they get with that to negotiate for what prices, lowest prices, especially when it comes to inputs, right? Access to most effective distribution channel, supply chain, superior quality products, all of these. And here we go, intellectual property. When we develop these things, even though we don't have a very big natural resource base, even though we don't have a large labor force and very cheap labor, still you can become competitive. It's a way of thinking. Got it? So I've listed these things out separately for you also. Just the paragraph is there, but sources of comparative advantage, cost advantage, and differentiation is what we are focusing on. So there's a whole list you can go through. You don't have to remember everything, but have an idea of what makes a country competitive in the modern definition of it. Get it? Right. So additional, I think that is what I should highlight first. Additional, if you got the entire thing, the concept into your head here, we are okay, we are done. But additionally, there's another way to talk about comparative competitive. That's where I said in the beginning, competitive advantage is more into absolute cost. So absolute advantage driven. This is about comparative cost, comparative advantage. You can read that, but nothing, nothing, you will not lose anything, or it doesn't hurt to read, right? It will bring a bit more clarity. But pick the first method I think I'm recommending and have an understanding of comparative and competitive advantage. Right? Okay? Right. Then we will talk about globalization. Okay, globalization. Yes, question. Competitive advantage and absolute advantage are the same? No, I wouldn't say. They're not conceptually the same. Both look at absolute cost, right? But how to get a competitive advantage is different from how to get an absolute advantage. We always argue, now in this field, you have learned sources of absolute advantage. In the sources of absolute advantage, we focus on those traditional things, resource endowment, taste and the preference of the country, the population, those kinds of things. They are very static things. But yes, in comparative advantage also, we look at the country that can produce at the lowest absolute cost, but the way we get to that, it's different in competitive advantage. We are more modern, the way we look at how to reduce cost in competitive advantage. I hope I answered your question. Okay, right. Globalization, I've given a good definition here. Globalization is a phenomenon or process of deeper economic social, technological, cultural, and political integration. Integration is coming together, right? Working together between countries and regions of the world through global networks. Now, how do we achieve that? Through global networks, trade, big part of it, capital flows, technology, and global media, social media and traditional media, global media. The process of globalization has an economic as well as a cultural and political aspect to it. It's not only economic, it has a cultural political aspect to it. The specific focus in economics is on economic globalization. So what is economic globalization? Economic globalization is the process of integrating countries of the world through various flows of trade, again, big thing, capital, and financial technological activities. That is economic integration. So there we focus less on the cultural, social aspects, but on the trade and the capital, financial, technological aspects. Right. So I've defined generally globalization, economic globalization. The standard measure of the degree of globalization, economic globalization of a country tends to be the openness of the economy. How do we measure how globalized the country is? Openness with which it engages with the rest of the world in terms of trade. So how openly do we engage in trade? Exports and imports tells us how globalized or the level of globalization we are having. Thus, international trade as a percentage of a given country's GDP. Import exports as a percentage of the GDP tells us how globalized that country is. The thing you are going to find out anyway. So can you scroll down a bit to highlight the parts? Okay. Scroll up, down. Okay. Depending on whether you're using a Mac or a Windows computer, I suppose. Okay. This part, am I correct? Okay. Okay. So then next we are going to talk about, right? Now we have idea about the whole globalization concept. Then we are going to ask the question, what are the driving forces of globalization? What are the main sources? How do countries actually get into this phenomenon called globalization? And why is it happening so fast in the world today? Right? Then we will look at the, we'll evaluate globalization, the advantages and the disadvantages. Okay? Right. Just to keep you guys updated that I might take or I might go for the break a bit early today than usual. Normally we go around 10:30, 10:45. Am I correct? So I might go for the break a bit early today because there's a call that I have to attend to. But we will nevertheless continue the class up to the usual time. Okay? Right. So page 34, done? Right. Sources of driving forces or sources of globalization. Right? So get used to that term driving forces because it could be asked that way. Technology, obviously, right? One of the biggest driving forces of globalization is technological drivers are there, right? Modern globalization, innovations, transportation technologies, not only ICT, Buddha, right? All types, sorts of technology. Advancement in microprocessors, you know, them becoming very small and we can have this very easy to, you know, carry around, install devices with us that we can connect and information communication technology, all of that. Technological drivers are very big. Then political drivers are there. Most countries believe in liberalization. opening up their economy, breaking down barriers, right? And most countries want to get membership and deal with multilateral organizations. That also opens up their economies. Then market drivers and reduction in trade barriers. Reduction in trade barriers. New markets opening up and most countries wanting foreign companies and people to come and invest these things. Then spread of and influence of, remember we talked about the multinational or transnational organizations. They are one of the major driving forces of globalization, multinational companies. Then sometimes countries to attain the benefits of economies of scale might want to open up their economy and deal with the other countries. When the global market is your focus, you can go for large scale production, economies of scale. Opening up global financial markets, right? Where you don't have to depend on the finance, only on your domestic economy, but you can get global financial markets open up for you, right? And especially the differences in tax systems. Now, this is where different countries attract investors by giving very attractive tax rates and tax. There are countries called tax havens in the world, where if you want to avoid paying taxes, you can route your revenue through those countries. Likewise, now, if you take Apple Incorporated, right? It's an American company. Well, Incorporated is an American company, but for tax purposes, they have registered their corporate office in Ireland or somewhere, and their revenue is sent through Ireland and the Irish the system, and it comes in, so that in America they don't pay a large amount of taxes because their revenue comes through a different country, or it is they this pay taxes, very small island percentage of taxes or what they charge from foreign companies as taxes is very low. So they have adjusted it that way. So because of this, companies want to deal with other countries in the world. I hope you got that point. That countries moving away from highly protectionist nationalist policies. Protectionist nationalist policies. Yeah. That's it. That's a print, misprint or a typo. So moving away from nationalist or protectionist policies. Nationalist is you look always within the country. You know, like the American president who came and said, "What? Make America great again." This is a classic example of nationalist thinking. Why focus on other countries? Let's focus only on America. Why deal with other countries? You know, that's why he was so against countries like China and all these countries. No, we don't need them. America, nationalist. Get it? Sri Lanka, you guys know how that works. Right. Driving forces of globalization. Okay. Then evaluate. Okay. Before this part, Putha, I will go for the break now. And after the break, we will look at the arguments for and against globalization. Then we will go into WTO, World Trade Organization. And then there are a few areas we have to cover. Okay? With economic integration, including economic integration. Okay? So with that, we will pause the first session. Right. So welcome back. Welcome back after the break. So we are starting off with the evaluation of globalization. That is, we are looking at some of the main advantages or merits and disadvantages or demerits of this phenomenon known as globalization. Especially, we are focusing on economic globalization. Right. So I've given a bit of a lengthy list of merits of globalization. There are about 13 points. You need not try to remember all of them, but definitely 6, 7 or so points that you can argue in a question that these are the advantages. Okay. So first one says an economy's production and consumption possibility boundaries shall shift outwards due to decentralization of global production process. Every country gets an ability to improve their output production capacity, right? And also consume more goods and services as a part of or as a result of being a part of globalization. Because global resources get distributed amongst all the countries. So that means each country's resource endowment is no longer restricted to the resources they have within the country, but on a global basis, they can receive benefits or use resources. Ability to acquire new ideas and experiences, right? Because only if we get exposed to different thought processes, different technologies, ways of approaching problems, finding solutions, we will become able to develop our new ideas and also build experience. Increase in volume of trade. That's a very straightforward point because one of the main driving forces of globalization is trade. So we engage in more international trade. Ability to use globalization as a strategy for economic growth. Now, this is what many countries, including Sri Lanka, we believe in, we try to do over the last 4.5 decades. But because we haven't consistently implemented the correct policies and strategies, we have not been able to do that. But on the other hand, there are enough countries in the world who have shown with their example that yes, international trade, globalization can be a very, we can say a quick way to achieve economic growth and development. Okay, South Korea is a good example for that. Countries like Malaysia, Singapore, these kinds of countries, Taiwan, yes, Vietnam to a certain extent is a good example for this. Increase in foreign investments, because when you open up your economy, start dealing with the world, it's a more attractive environment. It is more attractive for foreign direct investors, more attractive foreign direct investors. Possibility to import raw materials at low prices, because as global output increases, as we become more globalized, global markets become more liberal, and as a result, competitiveness increases and cost and prices decrease. Increase in foreign employment opportunities, improvement of education and knowledge standards, because we try to match our now even Sri Lankan national universities, to the best of my knowledge, they are doing this, but then I hope they will continue to do this and do it this at a higher rate. Try to match up with the very high standard of education offered by foreign universities. Generalization of new employment opportunity, generation of new employment opportunities. So increase in foreign employment and within the country also. So this is domestic, right? When MNCs come in and do investments, start new factories, production activities within the country, employment opportunities will increase. Then also through things like BPOs, you can stay within Sri Lanka and work for foreign companies. Then foreign currency remittances become main exchange flow of some countries. Yes, yeah, that's true. With globalization, you go and now Sri Lanka has this, right? Many Sri Lankans are working abroad and they send money back to the country. So that will be a way for us to get the dollars or the foreign currency we need in addition to exports. Integration of isolated countries of the world with international economic systems, right? As through that, their own domestic financial banking systems develop, their education systems, communication systems develop, expansion of new technology, right? It's towards the end, but definite advantage of globalization. That connects with the second point also. 13, production of high quality goods due to international competition. So I would say 13, 14 are things that you should try to remember, right, in your basket of advantages or points that you remember. Any question? Please do ask for the arguments against globalization, demerits of globalization, disparities or unfairness in the distribution of benefits of globalization. Yes, we talk about a globalized world where the entire world becomes one village, one community, and everyone is benefited. But such benefits, are they fairly distributed? Most of the time, no. The more powerful countries, economically dominant countries, get more of the benefits. Less economically powerful countries, economically dominant countries, countries who are not that economically dominant, they get lesser benefits from globalization. More benefits are gained by developed countries. So the first and the second points are interconnected there. Broadening of international income disparities. Right now, the world has been talking about this phenomenon called globalization. Basically, once the world somewhat recovered after the Second World War, so for the past at least 50 years or more, we have been talking about this phenomenon called globalization. Many Western countries have pushed the developing countries in the world to open up. We have put a lot of pressure on countries like China and Russia and so many countries to open up, become part of the global market, the global economy. But within all that, what we see is the income disparity gap between, especially per capita income gap between the average person of an advanced economy, developed country and a developing country, that gap has increased over the years. So there's clearly a first 3 points have a common theme: disparities, unfairness in the distribution of income, benefits, and opportunities that comes through globalization. So disparity is a big issue with globalization. Then number 4, high risk of global financial economic crisis situations and instability. That is true, Pudha, right? When the US economy goes into a meltdown, financial meltdown, that affects the entire world because US is so connected to the global economy and we are connected to USA through the global economy. Then when there is a crisis, financial crisis happening in one part of the world, that affects the other parts of the world and other countries in the world. Then number 5, growth of social riots, unrest, race riots in USA, spreading globally. When there are these kinds of social unrest in one country, very quickly it will spread to many countries in the world. Now, Sri Lanka is not a highly dominant, influential economy in the world. But there are enough countries in the world, youth in other countries in the world, who also might have felt their governments are, suppressing them, or government is not governing properly, would have seen the Aragalaya we did in 2022. Whether we achieved the objectives of the Aragalaya, whether that was what we wanted as an outcome of the Aragalaya is a different story, right? Today being the 9th of May, it was a significant day 2 years back where the Aragalaya went from a very peaceful thing to a very violent situation, right? And almost riots were there in the country, property was destroyed, all that happened on the 9th. I'm not trying to do the post-mortem of the May 9th, 2022 scenario, but all that aside, there are other countries, youth in other countries who would have got influenced by the Aragalaya we did, the youth in Sri Lanka did mainly, right? Then also at the same time, if you look at, now you might remember about 10 years or so ago, we had something called the Arab Spring. That is, most Middle Eastern countries, starting with Tunisia, most Arab speaking countries that were either kingdoms or ruled with more authoritarian rule, right? Where if they have a president, that person will be the president for 20, 30 years, this kind of situation where there was youth unrest and people came to the roads and streets and protested asking for democracy and things like that. So those kinds of things can spread very quickly around the world because how connected the world is today through globalization. Okay. There's a question. Sir, does a war between two or more countries negatively affect globalization? Yes, it doesn't need to be a war. Sometimes it can be a disagreement, kind of an unrest, kind of tensions, we say, geopolitical tension between two countries. It's not a war, but a war might break out, something like that. That itself is enough to create global destability, right? Now, the Ukraine-Russia conflict, right, has a major impact on many countries in the world, including Sri Lanka. Okay, because commodity prices will change, commodity prices will increase, that instability in that region affects the entire European continent, and through that it affects the European markets and our exports and all of those. Then when we have this Palestine-Israel issue going on, right, the humanitarian side of it aside, there's a major economic impact of that in countries in the world. When Iran gets into that whole problem, then that's another problem. When America and Israel and other countries have sanctions on Iran, that affects us because we are not Iran, but we do deal with Iran. So these are all interconnected highly. Then human lives being unsecure due to global wars, fast spread of health epidemics like the pandemic COVID-19. See, it went from an epidemic to a pandemic, COVID-19. It was an epidemic that was affecting China, mainland China, that's it, and Wuhan province of China. But it went from an epidemic within the shortest period of time into a pandemic. World Trade Organization named it as a pandemic because it spread so quickly, first to European countries, then to the rest of the world. Get it? Because we are so interconnected, because we travel around, we move about, our supply chains are integrated, all that. Then number 6. So then number 7. Putha, when I say global supply chain, you guys have an idea, right? In business studies, definitely I've learned supply chain. I think you will learn it under operations management or something. Yes, a unit or something like that. Can someone respond? Have you learned something called supply chains? Global supply chains? In business studies? No, not yet. Okay. Is there a unit in business studies called operations management? Yes. So you guys haven't still done that unit? Is that what you're saying? Yeah, you haven't done, right? Okay. So when you learn, you will learn about global supply chains, right? Okay. If you're not doing business studies, the basic knowledge you need to have in my explanation I'm giving. Okay. That is sufficient for economics, right? So today we believe in a concept of global supply chains. Now, during the pandemic, the automobile prices, car prices in the world market, in the Sri Lankan market, it always increases, no? Car prices in the world market increased for mainly 2 reasons. One is because certain components were becoming expensive, so cost side reason was there. Also, one of the main reasons why car prices increased in the world market was supply shortages happened. Supply shortages. Car manufacturers were unable to actually manufacture cars. Not because there was really a shortage of steel or the other things they need to make the chassis, the body, and the car itself. The main reason that they couldn't make cars or complete them and make them roadworthy and put them out for sale was there was a significant shortage of semiconductors, chips, microchips, right? Because of the countries who mainly make those semiconductors and the input needed to make the silicon and all that needed to make the semiconductors, they were affected with COVID. So what happened was in those countries, they were not making this small, tiny chip. The manufacturing was very low or it stopped. Then what does that have to do with cars? Because today all cars have to be equipped with several of these semiconductor chips. Because each car has a computer in it, a processor in it. So now what happened was when the semiconductor, the supply chain, all the inputs have to come in, then only you make. So when that got interrupted, car manufacturing got interrupted and prices increased. See how connected these things are, right? Then and today, we global supply chain means we don't manufacture the entire product in one country. Now, if you take cars, the chassis or the body of the car, the frame of the car is made in one country. The engine is made in another country. They make the engine in another country and they ship it, right? Then the seats and the whatever designing of the car is done in another country. The other components are made somewhere else. So the chassis and the components and the engine and the whatever, all those things, the designing, all that happens in different places in the world, but globally they are connected. It's like a chain, supply chain. One is connected to the other. And then there's another whole country that has nothing to do with the company, the mother country of the company, right? Toyota cars are made in India. When Toyota cars are made in India, India has nothing to do with the Toyota company, but they have an assembly plant in India. All the components are made in different parts of the world. Everything comes to India and they assemble the car in India. So it's definitely global supply chain. Okay, right. So when one part of the one link of the chain is interrupted, the entire thing gets interrupted. That's the risk that we have. The rising of now, why do we produce different components of a car in different countries? Why can't we produce in the same country? Isn't it cheaper? Actually, no. That's where the whole concept of competitive advantage comes in. In different countries, the skill set and the expertise and the resources are different. So different components of the car can be made at a lower cost in different countries. So you make in those countries, bring it and put it together, assemble it together. Assemble it. Arising of environmental problems, definitely. Today we talk about not Sri Lanka warming, India warming, China warming, USA warming. We talk about what warming? Global warming. We talk about what? Global warming. So today, environmental issues are not isolated to a country. It has spread because we are all using the resources in a very exploitatory and unsustainable manner and emitting so much CO2 to the atmosphere. Then destroying culture and cultural diversity. See, globalization means we try to make everything similar. No, we harmonize things and we say, okay, we are all the same, things like that. That is good. That is good. But on the other hand, Buddha, we do have our own cultural, traditional identity. That is what makes us who we are. Sri Lankan, Indian, Bangladeshi, there are cultural identities are there. Culture is something that has been built over many hundreds of thousands of years. So when all that is, when we try to make everything very equal, global and common and uniform, universal, that rich cultural diversity dies off. Get it? So that's an issue. Loss of employment due to collapse of what industries? Domestic industries. We talked about this under protectionism also, right? Okay. Any questions? Please do ask. WTO We don't need to go into a big discussion. You need to know, what their main objectives are. What does the WTO, what is the purpose of creating the World Trade Organization, right? And also you need to know some of their main functions. That should be sufficient, because generally this is mostly an MCQ question. Even if it's second paper, with this you can answer. Okay. So what are the objectives of the World Trade Organization, which was established in 1995? Promoting multilateral international trade, main objective, and reforming international trade mechanism through amendments to the trade laws by minimizing barriers to trade. So they want to promote international trade among countries, and they want to minimize barriers. These are the two main things. So we say free and competitive international trade, or free and fair international trade. Functions of the World Trade Organization. Mainly they go into activities of administration and implementation of international trade agreements. Okay. To make sure the agreements are followed properly. No country is at a disadvantage, something like that. Settlement of trade disputes. I missed the point. Provide the forum for negotiations related to promoting free trade. They negotiate with countries. They sometimes negotiate with, like the European Union, different organizations in the world, and they try to always promote free trade. Settlement of trade disputes between countries, arbitration they do sometimes. Revival of national policies of member countries, review of national policies. They look at the national policies and help these member countries to develop better policies that will give them more benefits from international trade. Help developing countries to settle problems related to trade policy. If they don't have a very prudent and a very long-term oriented trade policy, they try to help if that country listens, though. Implementation of technological aids and training programs, all that they do, technological aids, training programs. Then finally, act in a cooperating manner, right, with international economic institutions. Other institutions like the IMF, the World Bank, the European Commission, all these parties, they will act in such a way to coordinate and cooperate with them to make sure trade happens smoothly. Okay, these are the functions. So have a basic idea about the objectives and functions of the WTO. At least read it once or twice so that something goes to your head, and especially if it's an MCQ, you can pick a correct answer. WTO has nothing to do with international finance. WTO has nothing to do with foreign exchange rates. WTO has nothing to do with debt restructuring and all that. WTO is not about, it's not a development agency. They're not trying to create growth development in a country. They are purely about international trade, promoting international trade and minimizing barriers for international trade. Economic integration, regionalism is another word we use. Integration is the more common phrase that we use, right? Economic integration. So I've given a small intro into what economic integration is. The broader objective of integration is, among two or a few countries, create an agreement, create an understanding where they don't allow barriers, tax or non-tax barriers among them, where free trade can happen among them and where all countries benefit from that. So there are so many levels or stages, if not dimensions, of such integration, right? So we call them dimensions or stages of economic integration. So there are 6 we have identified. The 6th one is practically not there still, but the other 5 at different levels we can explain. Preferential trade area, PTA, free trade area, FTA, customs union, CU, common market, CM, and economic and monetary unions. Especially number 2, then number 3, number 4, these things are sometimes called trading blocks. So the word trading blocks is a bit broad. It includes different levels of integration. But blocks, like building blocks, trading blocks, you put each block together and you create something. Likewise, you bring each country together and you create a integration, right? Okay, let's go through the different concepts. So preferential trade area or agreement, basically, sorry, agreement, where countries can have an understanding between them, right? Among the two countries, they engage in trade for certain selected items or most goods without any tariff barriers between them. But when other countries try to trade with these countries, so we'll say Sri Lanka and India have a PTA. Sri Lanka and India have a PTA. When between Sri Lanka and India, we make sure that much as possible there are less barriers for trade. Free trade is there. Then when Bangladesh tries to do some activity or international trade with Sri Lanka, we will have a tariff, right? And that will be preferentially implemented. So Sri Lanka can decide how much they are going to charge from Bangladesh. India can decide when they engage in trade with Bangladesh, how much they are going to charge. So, and then that rate for Pakistan might be different when they engage in trade. For Nepal, Bhutan might be different. Afghanistan might be different. You get what I'm saying? Preferentially treated. So, so more preference is given between the two countries, India and Sri Lanka. Less preference is given to the non-member countries. So I've given some examples also. European Economic Area Agreement, North American Free Trade Agreement is example. NAFTA is actually, they have changed it to Mexico, America, Mexico, USA, USMCA. Okay, now they like to call this USMCA, United States, Mexico, Canada Agreement, USMCA. Okay, United States, Mexico, Canada Agreement, or certain understanding they have. Okay, because North America is basically those countries, Mexico, USA, then Canada. Free trade area. A free trade area is again a grouping of countries in the same region, obviously, in the world, where generally all tariffs between member countries is abolished. In a PTA, some goods, as I mentioned, some goods might be free of tariff, some goods might be less tariffs. Definitely it will be less tariff than non-members. Get it? Now, if India and Sri Lanka is in a PTA, if Sri Lanka is importing big onions from India, how much we will charge as an import tariff from India? It's about 10%, example. But if we import big onions from Bangladesh or Pakistan or China, we will charge definitely more than what we charge from India, because we have an agreement with India, preferential trade agreement with India. We will charge more from countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh, and China, maybe anything more than 10%, likewise. Right. But in the free trade area, within the member countries, we don't have any tariffs. We abolish. Okay. So I've given a whole list of examples for that. South Asian Free Trade Agreement, SAFTA. Then Asia Pacific Free Trade Agreement, APTA. Then the Africa Free Trade Agreement, don't pronounce it as a word. Central European Free Trade Agreement, right? Yeah, right. See, SEFTA, whatever it is. Then North American Free Trade Zone, NAFTA or NFTZ zone, but again, it's now USMCA. Okay, they use the term USMCA. Then customs union. So from this point only, I said we use this term trading blocks a bit more, right? So custom union, customs is the tariff, taxes, customs union, where two of you countries get together and now Sri Lanka, India, Bangladesh will say will comes into a trading bloc, customs union. Then among Sri Lanka, India, Bangladesh, for many goods, no tariff, no taxes, nothing, free trade is there. When Pakistan tries to deal with Bangladesh, when Pakistan tries to deal with Sri Lanka, and if Pakistan is dealing with, okay, so the customs union is formed between Sri Lanka, India, Bangladesh. We have a customs union, we'll assume. Example. Then, between India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, when we engage in international trade, for most goods, there are no tariff, no taxes. Free trade is possible. Customs union. The customs union, union meaning you bring things together, no? Is when we'll say Pakistan now comes and says they want to do international, they want to engage in international trade with Sri Lanka. Pakistan wants to do trade with Bangladesh, and for some, we'll say Pakistan wants to do trade with India. When these three things are there, when Pakistan deals with these three countries, all three countries from Pakistan, a non-member, in our example, a non-member, will charge the same tariff. If Sri Lanka charges 10%, that means Bangladesh and India will also charge 10%. Will also charge what for that 10%. That is what we call a customs union. The tariff is unified. Same taxes, same tariffs, customs union. Examples are given: Central American Common Market, Caribbean Common Market, North American Community, then South African Customs Union. Some examples are given. Right. So you guys are clear on this, right? Then we move on to, someone in the waiting room. But you have asked me to explain customs union. Is this before I did the explanation or now? I just explained customs union. So you want me to explain it again, is it? Okay. If you can concentrate on the example, then it's easy to understand this. Okay. So very quickly, I'll say it again. Again, if you can watch the recorded part again, it might help you more. Right. Basically, we have India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. We get into a customs union. Within our countries, we import, export without any tariffs or taxes or trade barriers. Then Pakistan tries to deal with India. Pakistan tries to deal with Sri Lanka. Pakistan tries to do trade with Bangladesh. Not that we refuse that. We do trade with non-member countries. So Pakistan is a non-member country. We trade with them. But when Pakistan trades with a member country, we will charge a tariff, and the tariff that India, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh would charge is the same. It doesn't differ from country to country. That's called a customs union. Here the word customs is the tariff union. Okay? Right. Then, common market. The thing about a common market is, it is an extension. Now remember, these are stages. So when we go from a PTA to a free trade agreement to a customs union, now to a common market, we are progressing. We are expanding our integration. We are becoming closer and closer and closer when we go from one stage to another. Now, the common market concept is it's a customs union taken to the next step. So the next step is all this time we had no barriers for trade, goods, imports, exports. Now we remove barriers across borders where people and capital, money, investment, and people can freely move about between the member countries. So Sri Lankans, if India, Pakistan, sorry, India, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh, this is an example. If India, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh have a FT common market, if India, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh have a common market, what that means is, right, Sri Lankans can go to India without visa restrictions. Sri Lankans can go to India, invest in India, be a part of the Indian economy. Sri Lankans can go and work in India. Indians can come to Sri Lanka. Bangladeshis can come to Sri Lanka, go to India. Amongst the countries, there are no boundaries. It's a common market. So India, Sri Lanka, Pakistan becomes one market with mobility of people, right, and the capital. That's called a common market. Again, I've given some examples. Okay. Here you can easily see it here. Freedom of factor mobility among members in terms of is termed as a common market. Get it? Factor mobility mainly we talk about yes, mainly factors of production are labor and capital. Here, of course, the capital is financial capital is what we are talking about. Okay. Capital in economics is not money, no. So financial capital. Right. Any questions you guys can ask quickly? Right. Then we go to the next stage, next level of integration, economic and sometimes known as monetary union. I would say both economic and monetary union. I prefer that term of phrase, right? EU, economic union. EU here is for economic union, and a good example for economic union is also EU, European Union. Get it? This is where, now first it was tariff that was similar, customs union, tariff uniformity. Then common market, you remove freedom of mobility, factor mobility. You can move all countries become integrated into one market, freely movable. We can move. Economic union, our not only the tariffs and not only the factor mobility, now our policies are going to get in sync. What is going to get in sync? Policies, mainly the monetary fiscal policies. Monetary and fiscal policies are going to be common. Get it? That's called the economic union, economic and monetary union. Examples are given. No better example than, right, the European Economic and Monetary Union. They have gone to the extent of even integrating what? Even integrating currencies. So we have the Eurozone. No? What is the Eurozone? Can someone tell me what is the Eurozone? European Union is one thing. How many countries are there in the European Union? Anyone? Akila, you are correct. No, you are one short. Can someone just, if you're joining the class with a laptop, okay? Can someone check? Queen, you are correct with that. Can someone just check? Do a Google, basic Google thing. I don't like to depend on Wikipedia though, but just try to find out how many countries in the European Union you will find. Right. It used to be 28 countries, but we had the divorce between European Union and the marriage ended between European Union and UK, United Kingdom. So 28 became 27. 28 became what? 27. That's the European Union. European Union, EU, is 27 countries. What is Eurozone? You guys, all of you are aware, there is a common currency that they use. What is it called? Euro. Okay. Common currency is called Euro, no, in the European region. Do you think that all 27 countries use the Euro? No. Out of the 27 countries, only 17 countries use the Euro currency. So countries that use the Euro currency as a common currency is called the Eurozone. So Eurozone is within the European Union. Now, when UK was in the European Union, when UK was in the European Union, they still used the sterling pound. They did not use the Euro currency. They had their own currency. So remember, all European countries in the European Union, they don't use the Euro. Only 17 countries use them. The countries that use the Euro, we call them Eurozone. And they are the countries where you get a special visa called a Schengen visa, where you can move between those countries, right? So that's basically the economic union concept. Get it? So currencies also, if it's common, the Eurozone is actually more than economic union. Eurozone is almost full economic integration. Full economic integration. Full economic integration. Okay? Right. There's a question from one of your classmates. Why are goods only traded in dollars in international markets? Not only, Buddha, there are Indian rupee, the Chinese yuan, the Japanese yen, sterling pound, euro. In different parts of the world, these are also used. But the most commonly used and accepted international trading currency is the US dollar. The reason for that is the economic dominance USA has as the largest economy in the world, and the percentage of international trade that is actually represented by them is very high. So their currency gets that dominance. And it's seen as, the US dollar is seen as a very stable currency. So because of that, people prefer to engage in international trade, quote prices, and make payment settlements in US dollars when you engage in international trade. Did I answer your question? Right. So then I have a small, before we look at total economic, okay, we'll finish that. Total economic integration, an arrangement of to exchange goods and services, factors of production among member countries, non-member countries without any barriers, all that is fine. And fiscal policy with common political policy among nations associated. Now, basically, even the currencies, even all the other policies, the entire view of the countries in the integration or the trading bloc is exactly the same, identical. Get it? There is the maximum possible integration is that even your currency you give up and you use a common currency. Okay, but in your professor's text, right? We have one of those there also. In your professor's text, and overall, the furthest we see practically in the world is economic integration, economic union, sorry. According to Google search, it says 19 countries in the Eurozone. Could be. What are the new countries? Croatia was there. Maybe they also use the euro now. There was one more country, Malta. I can't remember now. There was one more country who wanted to join the eurozone. Maybe they have accepted. Can I know the source? What is the website or whatever it is? If it's Wikipedia, I'm sorry, I have to think twice. If it's a credible source, maybe if it's the European Union website or something like that, European Central Bank website or something like that, then we can trust on that. Of course, you guys can get back to me with things like that. And the number can change, right? Because the European Union, they will, allow more countries to join. They want more countries to start using, out of the 27 countries, they want more countries to start using the European currency, common currency. Okay, right. So we'll check on that with that. Okay, then during the time of Brexit, it was actually, yes, it was 18 at that time, right? Because UK was anyway not using, no? It was 18. Now it could be 19. Maybe another country has also started using the euro. So let's verify that later. Okay. Okay, good. So one of your friends says Malta is there, no? All right, Malta is there. Croatia, is it there? They wanted to join. Latvia, yeah, Estonia, Lithuania. Okay, so when you count this, Buddha, how many do we get? EU website shows 20. Okay. Yeah, so we'll go with the European Union website. No, that's a better source. No? Yeah, so 20. Great. So if your classmates referencing the source is correct, I think that's the best source to go with. So we have 20. Okay, 20 countries. Out of 27, 20 countries are using the euro currency, eurozone. Right. Then this table I have taken from your professor's text. Okay. So I'm going to help you fill it because it's an easy way to remember these levels of integration. Some of the terms might be a bit different from what I would have used, but it's nevertheless, I think, a useful thing to have. Okay. So, yeah, we'll fill this. As I said earlier also, a bit of changes might be there in the words, but the overall concepts are the same with us. So I'll use this table, right? Okay, I think we can do it very with a lot of clarity. Ready? A PTA, preferential trade agreement, right? Preferential trade area, or sometimes referred to as preferential trade agreement also. Don't fuss on that. Right. Reduced tariff. Yes. Preference is that. Member countries get a lesser tariff, non-member countries get a higher tariff. So we'll take this that way. Removal of tariff. Some products, there can be a removal of tariffs, but your professor says, as I said, the terms, the way we look at it is a bit different. The removal of tariff part doesn't happen. There's tariffs, but preferential, lesser than non-member countries, among the member countries. Then common effective tariff, no, that is the customs union, no. Factor mobility, common market, no. Overall policy harmonization, that is monetary fiscal policies being the same, that is economic union, no. FTA, free trade area, okay, or again free trade agreement sometimes I've seen. FTA, reduced tariff, removal of tariff is there among the member countries. We can have no tariffs at all. No, no, and no. Okay. Customs union, progressive. Remember, so these are, if you take for the earlier one, you have to take for this one. Common effective tariff, yes. Common, if non-member countries, all the member countries will charge the same tariff from the non-member countries. Get it? Factor mobility, no. No. Common market, yes, 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 and yes. Factor mobility, but no. Economic union. And yes, policy harmonization is also there. Are we okay? Done? Right. Good. One more glimpse. Just check everything. Right. Then, main merits of economic integration. Trade benefits are there, definitely. Trade volumes increase. Trade becomes more convenient and less transactional costs are lesser. Employment opportunities are created, yes, especially with things like common markets, right? Political cooperation will be there, very high geopolitical harmony will be there between countries. Demerits. Diversion of trade, I've explained a bit, where you might be having really beneficial international trade with a non-member country. Now you'll have to divert that to member countries where, according to the agreement, but you might actually not be favoring, it might not be favorable for you anyway, but I've explained the concept, so I want you to learn it technically. Then erosion of national sovereignty. When countries integrate and integrate and integrate, I know there is a problem we have now. We had this economic and technical cooperation agreement, ETCA or something, with India. Right? So whenever we try to talk about this with India, most professionals in Sri Lanka, all of them get very, animated and they come to the streets and they protest and all that because they're saying, we will lose sovereignty, we will lose control of our economy, and Indians will come into Sri Lanka and they will take over our jobs and they will take over the economy. So that sovereignty independence is lost to a certain extent, sometimes to a great extent. Right. The important concepts: trade creation, trade facilitation, trade diversion. What is trade creation? Trade creation is the increase in trade between member countries of the trading blocks. Remember, trading blocks could be, we can start with free trade area also, but anyway, free trade area, customs union, common market, economic integration. Economic union. These are all different forms of what blocks? Trading blocks. Okay. Resulting from the formation and or expansion of a trading block. The main reason is the removal of barriers to free trade encourages greater specialization based on comparative advantage. So the trade creation is more trade happens between member countries because of trading blocks or economic integrations. Integration. Trade facilitation. Yes, question. So may I know what time class is finishing? Because the combined classes are usually scheduled with from. Can someone help me here? Today we took the break a bit early, but before the break also I mentioned that we will. Yeah, can someone quickly unmute the microphone and tell me what the usual timeline for the combined class? Very good. Thank you. 8:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. But if you look at your Zoom link, sometimes I schedule it for 8:30, 1:15. This I'm saying. But Kuta, today I understand why you're asking this question. We have a few more things to discuss, but we might most probably finish before 1. Okay, I can't exactly tell you how much in advance before 1, how earlier, but definitely before 1 we should be able to conclude. Yes, it could be within, it depends, right? I don't see me requiring a lot of time. So most probably within the next 30 to 40 minutes, we should be able to conclude. We should be able to conclude. Okay? Right. I hope that helped. Right. Then, so today the session was planned to complete Unit 9. And yes, in your respective theory classes and revision classes, we are hoping to give you the material for Unit 10. So next Thursday, we are starting Unit 10. Okay, right. So, trade facilitation. Trade facilitation is commonly understood as the transparency and efficiency of international trade procedures to reduce the time and cost international trade transactions. In international trade transactions, it is a broad concept that can apply to the whole of the supply chain. Remember? Global supply chain, all the components it can apply. Supply chain. After all, logistics efficiency can be just as significant for firms' competitiveness as its productive efficiency. Just by being productive efficiency, not enough. You have to get the raw materials on time. Whatever you produce should go out on time, So all that logistics efficiency. Trade facilitation is now regarded as a core element in trade and development strategy. So today we believe a country should have a really solid policy for trade facilitation. Sri Lanka as a hub of transportation, in terms of our geographical location in the world, Sri Lanka can become a country that is renowned for its trade facilitation. Get it? Especially the logistical side. Right. Then trade diversion. Trade diversion is the decrease in trade following trading blocks. So trade diversion and trade creation are connected with trading blocks. Trading blocks as trade with low-cost non-trading block members, remember I explained this a bit to you, is replaced by trading with relatively high-cost trading block members, because that's the agreement. We have to deal with the trading block members, so we come and deal with them, but we're actually giving up a non-member where the trade was low-cost, right? Thus, economic integration causes imports to shift from low-cost non-member countries to high-cost member countries. This is undesirable. So, trade diversion is generally undesirable and reduces the what advantage? Comparative advantage. Reduces the comparative advantage. So, now you guys know trade diversion. That's why it was given as a merit or demerit. demerit, diversion of trade. Right. Sri Lankan economic integration. What is our experience thus far? Right. So we have gone into several bilateral and multilateral agreements. Our bilateral agreements are very simple. I've given a really good explanation on bilateral trade agreements. If you read it once, it will make perfect sense. I believe certain things it's better that you guys read rather than me, rather than you listening to me read. Sometimes that is what happens. So, Hindu Lanka Free Trade Agreement, I want you to write the year, find and write the year in which these things were signed or came into effect. Okay? You should be able to find. Pakistan Sri Lanka Free Trade Agreement, these two are very active. Sri Lanka Singapore, not fully active, but find the year nevertheless. Free Trade Agreement. Then bilaterally, also, sorry, bilateral meaning about two countries. Bilateral means two countries. So bilateral means two countries. Now that doesn't mean, is that clear? Sorry, there was a lag in the slide. Two, right? Two countries. Multilateral doesn't mean many countries. Multilateral means with some kind of a trade organization or some kind of a trade, we'll say block. Really sorry for some kind of a trade block. Get it? Integration. So look at this. What do we have? We have Asia Pacific Trade Agreement. Yes, we are part of that multilaterally. South Asian Free Trade Agreement, SAFTA, SAFTA. Then BIMSTEC, Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multi-Sector Technical and Economic Cooperation. I know, too long, but BIMSTEC. Bay of Bengal Initiative for multi-sectoral. So many areas we can focus on technical and economic cooperation. Then global system of trade preferences among developing countries, GSTP, sometimes it's called. So remember some examples for multilateral trade agreements. Why is it important as a country for us to go into these kinds of free trade agreements? What is the benefit of doing so? What is the benefit of doing so? So mainly the importance of going into these kinds of free trade agreements is, as we discussed earlier, we get to expand our horizons. We get more advantage, benefit from international trade. Also, as if we strategically, very carefully, step by step integrate, we can modernize our economy, and that could be the way we achieve we achieve economic growth and development. But generally, I've given a list of points. Improvement in cooperation among countries. Improvement in cooperation among countries. Expansion of markets, right, that we can reach and go into. Decrease in cost of transportation because of the reduction in tariff and other, logistics supply chains can develop. Decrease in price of domestically produced goods because we can import things free of tariff. So as a result, import raw materials and the intermediate inputs without tariff from member countries. Improvement of foreign investment, FDI will improve. Possible to reduce new industrialized goods at a lower price, right? Possible to purchase, where we can get, if we enter trade agreements with newly industrialized countries, we can get their relatively high quality goods at a lower price with trade agreements. Increase employment with FDI and all that. Decrease in price of raw materials, as I explained earlier with the fourth point, I think. Yeah. Then expansion of opportunities related to export diversification. That's one of the major advantages. We can diversify exports. Okay, that's a big element there, export diversification. Are we clear? Remember a few, at least 6 or 7 points for importance of why we need to go into trade agreements and why the government is trying much as possible to get into trade agreements. Right. Then 2 indexes that you guys need to have a brief idea about, right? And I will give you this data, but I want you guys to do your a bit of a investigation or research as well. I gave you one thing, that is percentage of exports of Sri Lanka's GDP for 2022, percentage of imports of Sri Lanka's GDP for 2022. Find those. Also, if you can, what is Sri Lanka's ranking in the global competitive index for the most recent period that you can find? Okay, at least for 2 years, maybe 2021, 2022 period, right? See if you can find. Then the ranking of Sri Lanka in the doing business index. As you can see in the tute, I have left some space, right, to write these rankings. We'll do that next session because I want you to just take a small effort here. Okay, here also I have left the space to write the ranking, but after you take that effort. Okay, for now I'll just briefly explain these things. We talked about a concept called global competitiveness for that. So that concept is connected with the global competitiveness index. The World Economic Forum, you need to know who prepares these things. World Economic Forum has been preparing, or they are very interested in global competitiveness of countries. So they have come up with a very comprehensive indicator to show how globally competitive countries are by ranking, by creating a weightage of index and a index point system. And through that, what they do is they rank countries among other countries and help a country understand how competitive they are or how less or lack of competition they have, competing ability they have. So since 2008, they have followed a certain technical format of preparing this index, where the index scale ranges from 0 to 100, right? And calculating using the global competitive index 4.0 methodology. We don't need to know these technical things, just I've given that idea. The rank, the index score can range from 0 to 100. The score can range from 0 to 100. So if it's 100, you are highly competitive. If it's close to 0, less and non-competitive. What do they mainly focus on? Mostly they focus on, as I have mentioned earlier, how much the government helps the private sector, right? Civil society. How can they work together? How, to what level do they try to boost productivity, right? Generate prosperity. These kinds of things they will focus on when they try to prepare this index, right? So there's a wide range of criteria they look at. We don't need to know and memorize all the criteria, but when you understand the concept of competitive advantage, you really get an idea of what kind of things affects competitiveness, what kind of things affect international competitiveness. Okay, so I wanted to connect this with the earlier area we did, that is what? The concept of competitive advantage. Competitive advantage. Then if you come to the last part of this discussion, doing business index. Sometimes we use the term ease of doing business index, but we'll say doing business index just to give you a basic idea. Okay. Okay. Right. The broad focus and the sub considerations. There's a lot of things, I get it. But mainly we focus on, right? We focus on operating in a secure business environment. How secure the business environment of a country is. Okay? Both financial, economical, and security wise also. Then how easy is it to start a new business? Right? How easy it is to find and get the permits for a location to start a new business. How easy is it to access finance or go to banks and get loans and the money you need to start a business in that country, right? How easy is it to deal with the day-to-day operations of a business, especially when you have to deal with the local government authority, the municipal councils, the other authorities to get that approval, this approval. Day-to-day operations, how easy is it to deal? So if these things are positive, then ease of doing business is high. We get a higher ranking. If these are negative, then ease of doing business is low, we get a lower ranking. Sub-consideration, there's a whole list of things. We don't need to go through everything in detail, but read them once or twice. Because again, as I've said many times before, some basic thing will go into your mind. Is that clear? Right. Try to find the rankings of these indexes. And next session, I will check with you on this. And do remind me to check with you on this. And we'll finalize that. So with that, we have completed. I would like to say, even though we are finishing the session a bit early, I would like to say a pretty comprehensive discussion on international trade, unit 9 of your syllabus. I did mention that it will be a rapid series of combined classes, but I did not lose sight of the clarity and the quality of what I was sharing with you in terms of the material, in terms of the explanation. I hope you guys agree with that. So with that, we conclude this session.